One of my favorite terms I ever heard out there was Christian amnesia. It's where you just spend time reading the Bible, learning something about God. Maybe it's your whole ministry, like what I have, but you forget what it actually looks like. Like in a sense of like, you can use words to convey the message, you can talk about it, but you forgot. You have to go back to the roots. And so this hit me about like a month ago, where I found myself getting in an argument over theological issues that were not salvation issues. It was really that like church structure and church structure theology type conversations that we all find ourselves in one day or another. Perhaps you find yourself in that now with some people in your life. Let's say, if you ever gotten into a conversation saying like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? A conversation like that where it's like, well, it's the chicken, no, it's the egg, and then you gotta kind of sort it out, and eventually like logic wins out or something like that. Unfortunately, where I wish is like logic won out in my conversation is my issue was I did not approach that conversation in a good spot. So pick the thousands of gray area topics in the Bible that you could talk about that all these different church splits have all occurred upon, and pick one of those. I'm not going to say the specific one that I was talking about because it doesn't really matter, because what really does matter is the gray area of the pendulum. You got A, you got B, and there's a lot of different topics in the Bible where there's a ton of evidence for A, there's a ton of evidence for B. I'm not talking about salvation here, where Jesus is the only way to heaven. Like, no one gets to the Father except through me. Like, that language is very specific. So I'm not talking about the gospel message gray areas. I'm talking about the church theology, the church structure, like the things where Paul has a lot of those writings where, what did he mean by this? Can we do this? Can we do that? Or think about the Old Testament of like, did he mean this or did he mean that? Pick your battle, pick the conversation, apply it to what you've gone through recently. So in the time that I was having this conversation, though, it wasn't good. I instantly went into the conversation with, I was not trying to understand. I was trying to prove something and prove that I'm right. Like, hey, look how much I studied. Look how much I know what I'm talking about. Look at all these examples, and just really try to poke holes in the logic of, what, my logic might not have been 100% either, but at least it was a stronger argument, and really just like, hey, can we just, an unhealthy debate argument. And I was like, got heated, and I was like yelling, and I was like, then eventually, like, I just sat there and kind of just like let it zone out and was like, wow, like, what did I just do? And it was just that like embarrassing, shameful moment of pride took over. One of the things that I want to have on my gravestone when I die is genuinely like, hey, dude was humble. Like, if can only pick like 3 words, I want humility or humbleness to be one of those words. But unfortunately, my actions ruined my reputation that day, in the sense of it's going to take a while for anyone to see me as anything but like arrogant or prideful or anything. And if I want to leave behind the reputation of being humble, it's going to be a long road up, because once you ruin your reputation, which is super easy to do, it's a lot harder to build it back. And if you want to build it back in the way of something like humbleness, you have to show, hey, it's easy to show pride in one time. Like, I like to think of like 1/10. It's like, hey, 1 out of 10 times you can be prideful and you're known as a prideful person. And it takes you 20 times for someone to remember that you're humble. I think there's actual studies on this. And so I should go look this up and find this out. But there is something that says like, hey, it's like 1 negative to every like 5 positives or something. And so that was probably the hardest part of the whole conversation. Was I had this realization moment where it's just like, wow, like, I literally have a ministry for teaching people like, hey, close the gap between what you know and how you live. And I did anything but that. I did anything but exhibit what I'm trying to help other people do. And that was like, wow, it took my pride, knocked it on the ground. And so it wasn't so much the fact that I was maybe arguing, but like, it was because the way I was going about the argument was just wrong. And it was like we'll just say this. Everything that happened that I did in that conversation was everything I don't want to be known for, everything that I know I shouldn't have said, and everything that is just bad. How many times has that happened to you in your life, where you're in an argument with a spouse, or you're talking to your kids, or you're with your coworkers, and everything in between, and next thing you know, you're just like, this was everything but what I actually wanted. I can't be the only one. And then look at the biggest things in your life that you've had that encounter with. Like I said, your spouse or your kids. And for me, it was just like, wow, I was around all these people. And the biggest thing that hit me was like, this is the foundation of your ministry, Steve. And you can't even live out what you're trying to teach and preach. And I was like, holy crap. Like, that's not good. But at the same time, the thing that I love is I can sit down here and authentically tell you I done messed up AA Ron. If there's an AA Ron out there, I done messed up. And everyone else that knows that will get this. But like, I really messed up. I really screwed up. I do not practice perfectly what I sit down here and teach. And I think that's what I really love about this podcast is I can come on here and tell you it's just like, this is about real people, real faith, real transformation. And you know what real people means and real faith means? It means there's times where you will doubt God and you will screw up. And that's okay because it's not the defining moment in the story. It's what do you do after the screw up? What do you do after you doubt with your faith? What do you do after everything? And then honestly, I believe you're going to have these moments over and over and over and over again in your life. It's not just like, oh, I had a faith moment of doubt. I had a life moment where I failed. No, you're going to have all these different areas where it's like you fail even on the biggest spectrums and the biggest, broadest stages. But what happens afterwards? And that's where I like the last little part of the podcast is like real transformation. It's like real people, real stories, real faith, real transformation, just real anything. That's kind of the whole goal of this podcast. But the transformation piece is what happens afterwards. Like, can you really put into practice and can you really go from knowing to following and then be changed? So some of the questions I asked myself afterwards is like, why was I arguing about this? And that was hard because when I was like, well, I was arguing about this because I wanted to be right. I wanted to be known as the person who knew what they were talking about. And I can't be the only one in this either. And another question was like, am I trying to point people toward Jesus or am I trying to prove that I'm right? And that was another thing. I'm like, well, I can care less right now about pointing people to Jesus. What I care about right now is that I'm right and you're wrong. Now that also was like, well, that can't be good either. And so if you saw my social media, that led to like a few weeks of kind of just like figuring things out of where I wanted to be like, I think I fell into this trap that I call of polished Christianity. And that is where I got so hung up in like the do's and the don'ts and the how-tos and the what's right and the what's wrong that, like I said earlier, I missed the person of Jesus. I missed the communication of the person Jesus. And I'm like, I must be a certain way. I must look a certain way, must do a certain way. But the funniest thing about that is, like I said earlier, believing that I need to live the polished version of Christianity made me completely miss the message in the first place in how I lived. Polished Christianity looks really good in our head. It doesn't look good in the way that we live our lives. Polished Christianity is that kind that looks really good. And you're like, wow, you look so all put together. You really know your stuff or everything in between. But like your life is a mess. And internally in the sense of you're a fraud. Like that's how I felt. Okay. Like I felt like my polished Christianity was really showing that day because I had I could really logically talk about what I wanted to talk about. But the whole actions and missing the person of Jesus was what was getting sacrificed that whole time. And I was like, what the heck? Like my polished Christianity made me miss the person of Jesus. And I'm like, isn't this like the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those stories there where it's like the religious law people were so focused on keeping the law and doing the right thing that they missed the person of Jesus right in front of them. And like this was like my aha moment. And as I sit here and process it with you and teach you about this, it's like really crazy that I'm like, wow, I experienced what I thought was what I always teach against, which is being like having all your ducks in a row and like everything that comes to faith is just like being clean and neat. But I was trying to be clean and neat. And when you're trying to be clean and neat, you miss the person of Jesus. And like the two just cannot coexist. I don't know. This is how my brain is going. And I hope you can keep up with this. But it's fascinating. It's like we can become so focused on polished Christianity, the do's and the don'ts, and having the perfect theology, and we miss the person of Jesus and the whole message of salvation in the first place. Like imagine if like another person was sitting there, had no idea about who Jesus was, and just saw this like me in this conversation, and they would be like, "One, I don't want to follow what you have to offer because what you just are an arrogant asshole." Let's just say that. That's what I looked like. And that was a box of rocks that I had to chew on. One of the pieces that we can go back to scripture and look at is 2 Timothy 2:23-24. And this is where it's like, wow, like let this really sit in if you're like me and this is really a part of your story recently. Again, I say, don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments and only start fights. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone, be able to teach and be patient with difficult people. And then James 1:19-20 says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. If you've been following me for any amount of time, I've talked about that James verse in a podcast episode not too long ago. And I did not even follow through with that advice on my own. I would say maybe I follow like my own advice like 9 times out of 10, but that's the whole point of not living a perfect life and not saying I'm perfect, but like, can I get back up? Let's just use the fighter analogy, and me following through with what I'm learning and following Jesus is like a fight. It is a fight. You're in a boxing ring. I was watching what was it, MMA the other day, and these guys are just going at it. That's what it feels like. And you're going to get KO'd sometime by your own actions. And it's inevitable. You're going to get knocked out, and so I practiced and I was doing really good with how I spoke and everything. But then left hook, boom, took me out. And I was going right back to speaking like it was nobody's business, and then I got involved with foolish, arrogant arguments, like I just said. And I completely diminished anything that I talk about on this podcast that you would ever listen to or want to follow. But isn't that the point? And that's just where it's like, wow, you can learn so many lessons in a situation like this, because now you even see God's grace in it. You're just like, God knows that I'm going to screw up. God knows that I'm sitting in front of a podcast and I'm teaching people, like getting into kind of like leadership roles and stuff. But I'm like still the biggest screw up. But I'm willing to admit that. And I'm willing to say like, hey, you know what? Like I will screw up. Just watch me, but you will notice that every time I screw up, it doesn't stay there. I have a moment of realization and I come back. It's like repent, forgiveness, stuff like that. It's like, hey, you got to recognize what you did and you got to turn around and you got to get back up. You got to get back up and keep following Jesus. Get egg on your face. Just keep going, and get other people around you to pick you up. Like listen to any part of this podcast at any amount of time and you'll hear all these resounding themes. But today's big one is I am not perfect and I make huge mistakes, and I frankly wouldn't be surprised if I lost many more followers in my already abundant following, because I am the furthest from should ever be in front of a camera or on a microphone. But the only reason I'm doing it is because I just want to share real stories of what it looks like to follow Jesus. And today's was like, yes, I'm trying to start a ministry and I can't even do what I'm trying to start a ministry for. And that's okay. Because guess what? I just care about, it really came back to the heart of just like, I care about Jesus and I care about teaching other people about Jesus. And so if this story makes you like unsettled, like I should only be following somebody that has it perfectly all together, please leave. But if you're like, I like following somebody who's kind of like me and doesn't have it all together, but dude just loves Jesus, is willing to talk about him all the time and admit when he messes up and he's still going to keep going in the right direction, then come on, follow me, like, subscribe, join the community of imperfect people following Jesus. And I think that is the thing that we have to really focus on, is like when we say imperfect, when Revived is about messy people, when Revived is about people who don't have it all together, who have issues, who have addictions, who have anything, you fill in the blank. The whole point is, can we keep following Jesus in the midst of life sucks or things are really hard? And what does it actually look like to keep moving that direction together? Not getting caught up in the polished Christianity, but the actual authentic, let's follow Jesus and let's not get tied down on things that don't really matter. And so having said that, a big realization, I know I said this a lot already, but the big realization from that conversation earlier was I thought that being right was the goal, but Jesus is after my heart and he's not after my argument scorecard. And that was something that's kind of the moment where I realized like, wow, like Jesus is after my heart. He's not after how many arguments I can win. Jesus is after my heart. He's not after how many times I'm right. Jesus is after my heart. He can care less if I lose an argument. He's after my heart and transforming me. And so that was where the grace piece kind of just really showed me that. And so with all that being said, and I know I've said a lot, I want to talk about what happens next. What happens after you have that kind of conversation? What has been the last few weeks since this conversation and since this complete butchering of the path that I wanted to walk? Well, like I said, you have to do like 5 things good to like every time you mess up. I don't know, some science like that. But if my goal is to have humility on my tombstone, is like I've been focused on like, okay, God, teach me what it is to be humble and teach me what it is to move forward in humility. So humility means listening to people that I disagree with or that I think are wrong. So I went and I listened online to a lot of other people's opinions about the thing I was arguing about. And just like, okay, great. Like I can now hear both sides. And it's just like, you know what? Both sides are like arguing for Jesus. And that's something that's like, okay, that's interesting to pay attention to. And so like, can I be humble and can I just like sit with people that even if they disagree with me, no matter the issue. And one thing like also is just like, I should never compromise truth to demonstrate grace. And so that's something we do have to be careful about because I think there are some things where it's like, well, your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. I'm like, no, the Bible is the source of truth. And so there are some things that are very true and very laid out in the Bible as true. And so we must adhere to those and not like go and like, oh, let's go all on grace, and love each other and forget the truth. It's just like, no, like truth exists for a reason. Because without it, we would all be screwed. And then repenting. It's like, I got to like now live differently these last few weeks and live differently even now, like going forward. And so it means like owning my pride and not defending my behavior of saying like, hey, you know what? I had every right to act the way I did. Sure, maybe I did. Does it really matter? No. What matters more? The person that I'm trying to like talk to, like I talked about earlier, was I trying to lead that person to Jesus? Even if that person knows Jesus in that conversation, my goal of the conversation, like I said, was I was trying to win conversation, not trying to point people toward Jesus at the end. And shouldn't that be the goal? And I would encourage all of us, when we get caught up in these gray issues, can we have this little voice in the back of our head that says, hey, you know what? Like, make sure that this is pointing to Jesus. And I think that'll change the way we have those conversations to where you will lead more with grace and you'll stick close to truth, like as much as you know what is true. So definitely study what is true. But on those things where it's like, wow, like even some of the greatest theological minds for centuries could not agree on this topic, then know that you're probably not going to be the one to know that either. And that's okay. So therefore, have some grace in the way that you communicate and have some grace in the way that you receive. Can you do that? Because that's what I'm trying to do. And so like I said, so the goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to become more like Jesus. And Jesus is just grace and truth so perfectly just wrapped up. He does it so well. And you get there by studying the person of Jesus. You get there by becoming more like him, by spending time with him and doing as he did. And so the challenge, what is the challenge that I have for this whole thing? Ask yourself this next time you're in a conversation. It can be an intense one, it can be a light one, but you definitely know you don't see eye to eye on the topic. Hey, let's broaden the scope. Let's just not say the Bible. Let's say politics. Let's say pop culture. Let's say the Bible, theology, books, anything. Broad spectrum. Okay. Are you trying to lead people toward Jesus, or are you trying to prove that you're right? That's the challenge in the conversations that you have. This week, be quick to listen, slow to speak, willing to walk away from an argument that you don't need to win. And that's something about those verses that I loved about reading earlier is something that I can spend a whole podcast episode on this. So I'm just going to do my own little bit here, but I am the biggest culprit of not being quick to listen. I love listening to respond. And that has just been an issue with me for so long. And I'm like, goodness is there a book or something someone can point me toward to help you like really good like listening cues? It's like I don't want to just respond with like I hate when you get with people and some of these people are just like, I'm a really good listener, but I ask you question. It's just like, but I feel like that's a way of like those people being like, well, this is what I want to say, and I'm going to have you say what I want to say by asking the questions I want to say. I wouldn't say that's a good listener. I would say that's like a manipulator in conversation. I don't know if you ever sat with those people. I do every once in a while. Or not really every once in a while. But anyway, I've been in conversations with those people before where it's like, okay, all these questions, like you're not really listening. You just keep listening to ask me your questions, or you're not really listening. You're listening to respond with what you have to say. And so I want to be a really good listener. And so if I think like the Bible verses said, if we were quick to listen and slow to speak, we would not get angry. We would be really thinking about how would Jesus respond in this moment? And if I'm trying to reflect Jesus, how would that go? And so we can put all these things together, and then we can answer this question fairly. Are we trying to lead those people toward Jesus, or are we just trying to prove that we're right? And so if we're really listening and we're being slow to speak, we'd be able to answer that question before we said anything. So I'm just going to read that verse again because it was so good. Again, I say, don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments that only start fights. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone, be able to teach and be patient with difficult people. So you're probably only going to be arguing about whatever topic it is with difficult people. So that was the 2 Timothy verse. And this is the James one about being quick to listen and slow to speak. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. And so when you slow down in your mind, when you slow down in those conversations, it's going to give you the wisdom. It's going to give you the ability to really think carefully about what you say. And then also it'll give you the moment to be like, yo, this isn't about me. This is about Jesus. This isn't about me. If it's like, maybe it's like a, whatever it is, like look through that filter. Like I said, pop culture or politics or anything in between. It's just like, if your end goal should be pointing that person toward Jesus, should that be the end goal of any conversation we have in our lives? Is like, we should always be pointing toward the person of Jesus. You know, like even go broader. It's like you're talking about at the end of every conversation, you should be more encouraged in the pursuit of Jesus. You know, yes, there's sometimes just have fun and talk and make jokes and laugh. You know, I said some off-color jokes too a little while ago, and I'm just like, why did I even say that? It's like, dang it, man. You know, it's just like, I am beyond perfect and I screw up a ton, but I did keep coming back to Jesus because I'm just like, I just love him and I know that he loves me, and it is by faith I get into heaven. One of the scariest moments, I think, is when I die. There is nothing I can do. I will be 100% utterly dependent. I'm just like, okay, I'm going to close my eyes in death, but I believe I'm going there. But if I go to heaven, it's because Jesus is letting me come. You know, I will close my eyes, and in order to appear in the presence of God, it is going to be because of Jesus. And that's like a really scary thought, but I'm just like, I know that is my future. But I'm like, dang whiz, it's like to be that vulnerable, that surrendered. You're going to have that moment in your life where you're going to have that moment of complete, you have absolutely no control for once in your life. And it's going to be completely dependent on somebody else for where you end up. You know, and like that part is scary, but for me, it's not scary because I know what will happen for me and what will happen for you. That's a good question to wrestle with. So I'll just leave you with this. So maybe the reason you cannot hear what God is saying or God is trying to teach you is not because he hasn't spoken, but maybe your pride is just too loud to hear him. You know, that's what I had to learn the hard way, was my pride was really loud and I just could not hear when it came to like being in the moment of those arguments, like I said, but being slow to speak and quick to listen. It's going to let you lower that pride and lower the volume of the pride so you can hear God speak and you can deliver those messages through you in those conversations. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Like and subscribe and follow for more imperfect conversations about following Jesus. But hey, welcome to Revived, and thanks for following us. Cheers.